It's the night so many of you have been waiting for. Round one of the NFL draft. You're going to hear from Ravens GM Eric DeCosta, ESPN analyst Booger McFarland, and we'll check in with reporters throughout the AFC North to get a temperature check on what the competition is up to. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm WMAR-2 News sports reporter Xavier Wary, and we have an amazing NFL draft pre-show for you tonight. You know, this weekend, it is the culmination of these young men, their hard work and their dedication to the game of football, and 257 players will be drafted over the course of this weekend. And of those 257 picks, your Baltimore Ravens, they have 11 of those picks. Now, here's the breakdown of the Baltimore Ravens and their selections this year. The first picks will be in round one with the 27th overall selection. Due to losing players like linebackers Chris Board and Malik Harrison, cornerback Brandon Stevens, and offensive lineman Patrick McCarry to free agency, the Ravens received 4 compensatory picks, which is the maximum allowed in the NFL. They'll be using those picks in rounds 4, 5, and 6. And recently, the Ravens have been on an absolute heater in the first round. Their last 6 first-round draft picks have stepped in and been major contributors to the team. But all of that is in the rear view, and Eric DeCosta says he doesn't like to live too much in the past. Now, his team, they have spent the last 8 months creating this draft board, and historically, they've gone with the best player available. DeCosta says you can expect that approach this weekend.
I've always looked at draft picks as currency. You can either use that on a player, you can trade up, you can trade back, you can trade for future picks in future years. I think we're fortunate to be in this position. I think that as we continue to sign back our players, as many as we can, our good young players, we're going to be in a situation where, you know, salary cap is critical. And so for us, young talent, the influx of young players every single year competing to make the roster, I think is really important.
Drafting 27th overall can be a gift or a curse depending on how you view it. On one hand, it means you're not getting a top draft prospect, but it shows you're competing at a high level and could be just a few pieces away from reaching championship status. DeCosta feels they can get there in this draft class, which he says has a ton of depth.
I see a lot of opportunity in this draft class, really, in the middle rounds. I see more players. I see more draftable players. So we have 217 players right now on the front board. And there have been years where we've had a hard time getting to 160, 165. So there's a lot of draftable players. That means that the mid-rounds are going to be really good. And also, I think undrafted free agency should have a chance to be really, really good for us.
While DeCosta didn't give any specific names on who they're targeting, both the O-line and D-line seem to be top priorities.
I think it's a good, strong offensive line class this year. Across the board, a really, really good group of tackles and guards as well. And so, you know, I think that anytime you have a chance to draft an offensive lineman that you think can be a really good player, you should do that, especially the way we play football, you know, because we're a team that prides itself on running the ball and being physical, knocking people off the ball, controlling the clock, protecting the quarterback. You know, we've always been a team that wants to be big and strong and powerful on both sides of the line, both sides of the ball. So I think there's an opportunity for us to get better on the defensive line for sure.
With the departure of Brandon Stevens and Tre'Davious White, improving the secondary also seems like a guarantee.
Corner is critical, important position. They break down, you know, they're like Bugattis, and they just break down. And you've got to have them in reserve. I feel pretty sure that we'll take at least one corner in the draft.
I asked DeCosta about his recent draft success in the first round and if that has any impact on his confidence. He said not really, because he would rather step into each and every single draft with, quote, the weight of the world on his shoulders as he tries to live up to that standard that former GM Ozzie Newsome once set for the Ravens. But one team looking to improve their set of standards is the Cleveland Browns. It was an absolutely brutal year for them a season ago, going 3-14. But this offseason, they secured the number 2 overall draft pick. And a few weeks ago, many people thought that they would have drafted a quarterback at that number 2 position. But after bringing back Joe Flacco to the team, it seems that they're going to go best player available as well.
They may be able to go now best overall at number 2, which I think is what we fully expect this team to do. And then maybe at 33 overall, which is the first pick in round 2, draft a quarterback, or maybe even, Xavier, trade back up into the bottom of the first round and take that QB.
It's a draft that maybe has a lot of depth in the middle rounds. So DeCosta mentioned, like, hey, listen, we can get a lot better in rounds 3, 4, 5, just because of the depth that's there overall. The Ravens have 11 picks. The Browns not far behind. You guys have 10. How much do you feel like this overall roster can improve with having 10 picks?
You just made the case for taking somebody like Travis Hunter, right? The way you describe this draft and the way they describe this draft is there's a lot of mediocre talent. And you don't want to say that out loud. But if that's the case, you go out and get the guy that is the best available prospect. Mel Kiper called Travis Hunter his best prospect since John Elway, right back in the early 80s. When you have an opportunity to take a guy like that, I think that this team can really improve.
If you've spoken to any Cleveland Browns fans, or if you just kind of had a temperature check on where they sit right now, how are they feeling with having the number 2 overall pick and having 10 of them? And where do they feel like this team can go next season moving forward?
Well, you know how fans are, right? Nobody can agree on anything, right? The fact that most people seem to agree on either taking Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter should tell you, A, how good those 2 prospects are, but B, you know, this is a team that understands they don't have a quarterback. This is a fan base that understands it doesn't have a quarterback. But it's also an AFC North fan base. It is an intelligent football fan base. And while most people would argue Browns fans are eternally optimistic, and sometimes unrightfully so, they understand that if you don't think that quarterback is there at number 2, you don't reach for it.
It's really a shame kind of what happened to the Browns last year as far as that quarterback position is concerned, because you just mentioned it. When you have talent everywhere outside of that position, it makes it very difficult to win.
You're going around this AFC North and you have 2 teams in 2 very different positions than the other 2 teams, right? In Cleveland, you don't have a quarterback. Pittsburgh literally doesn't have a quarterback unless something changes between now and draft day and Aaron Rodgers becomes a Pittsburgh Steeler. And then on the other 2, you got 2 of the entrenched superstars in this league in Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. And it just changes everything about the way you approach everything from free agency to draft time, right? When you have that quarterback, you feel free to do whatever you want. When you don't have that QB, everything hinges on the quarterback.
Picking number 2 is going to be the highest that the Cleveland Browns have drafted since they chose Baker Mayfield number 1 overall back in 2018.
You're watching WMAR-2 News, part of the Scripps News Group.
With the Ravens drafting 27th overall, they don't really have much control on who falls to them on the draft board, and they've been tight-lipped on who they have their eye on in particular. Nonetheless, whoever is selected with that 27th overall pick is going to be expected to contribute based off of their prior selections. I spoke with the Athletic's Jeff Zrebiec about the Ravens' approach to this draft in particular.
There's 5 or 6 positions where you could say, you know what, we could use a guy to come in and contribute immediately. And I think that's what is going to make this draft pretty exciting and a little unpredictable from their perspective.
Many NFL draft experts will tell you this is not a sexy draft class. Jeff Zrebiec believes outside of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, the Ravens could be eyeing every other position on their draft board.
I think that makes what they do at the number 27 really interesting, because you could say edge rusher, that would fit. Defensive lineman, that would fit. Offensive lineman, that would fit.
Speaking of offensive linemen, Zrebiec says one has caught his eye.
Tyler Booker, the tackle at Alabama. Mauler, big, physical, talks about taking people's souls. Like, he'd fit in there. He's a plug-and-play guy. You don't worry about it. He's your left guard maybe for the next 8 to 10 years.
Another standout player is Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia.
You read about him, and it feels like you're reading about a Raven. Versatile, can play anywhere, can play deep, can play in the slot, can play close to the line of scrimmage. Apparently is known as a great communicator, leader. He's been durable. He makes plays on the ball. It feels like you're reading about a prototypical defensive back that the Ravens like to add. It's how they got Kyle Hamilton. Some teams don't believe in taking safeties early. They don't believe in his premium position. So Kyle Hamilton fell in their laps, and I think they're mighty glad he did.
No matter what direction the Ravens decide to go in round 1, their recent first-round success over the past few years has many people excited and expecting another successful pick tonight.
When you pay a lot of really good players and you look at them position by position, and there's spots where they have some of the highest paid players in the league. When you have that, you need to hit on your early round draft picks. It's a big letdown if you miss. Now the guy doesn't necessarily have to come in and be a star immediately, but you need first round picks that come in and are capable of playing immediately and positively.
Now, last year, the Baltimore Ravens, they won the AFC North division, and they went 4-2 against all the opponents. And the only team that they did not lose a game to was the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals had a pretty odd year last year. They went 9-8, but defensively, they saw a lot of struggles. And I sat down with Scripps reporter Caleb Noe out of Cincinnati, and he says that you shouldn't be surprised that the Bengals go all defense in this year's draft.
I think the dominating thought right now among the Bengals fan base, among people who follow the Bengals, is that they will certainly go with defense in round one and probably heavy on defense throughout the course of this NFL draft, in which they currently have 6 picks. I think that, the dominating thought would be that they would not just go defense in the first round, but go with defensive line.
Do you think, or do you believe that you all could get a defensive game changer with pick number 17, or at least have you heard that, maybe some of the Bengals staff believes that there is somebody who could be a franchise changer, at least on that side of the ball, with that number 17 pick?
There are a couple of guys that would fit what the Bengals are looking for, specifically Walter Nolan. I'm in the camp where I think if Walter Nolan is available at 17, the Bengals are going to have to think long and hard before they pass him up. He's an interior defensive lineman, defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, transferred there from Texas A&M. I think he would be very hard to pass up.
Outside of interior defensive linemen, how else would you like to see the Bengals kind of fill out their roster in this draft?
No doubt about it. The Bengals need to add talent at every level of the defense. And then the other one for the Bengals is at offensive guard. That is a hole that the Bengals have to have filled. Now, is that hole filled in the draft? Maybe. I don't know if you go and get a guard in the first round. I mean, if there's some kind of wild run on defensive linemen in the top half of the first round, then maybe. But, there's a lot of very good tackles in college football that could be open to transitioning to guard in the NFL.
How confident are you in where this team stands right now and where they seem like they're going to be heading?
I'm going to sound like a major broken record, my man, but they just need help on defense. If they can get help on defense and if they can add the right guys on defense, there's nobody anywhere that could say that this Bengals team can't be a contender to win the Super Bowl this coming year. They should have been a contender to win the Super Bowl last year, but you're scoring 30, 35, even 40 points in a given game. You all saw that in Baltimore, right? I mean, the Bengals scored over 30 points twice against the Ravens. Scored over close to 40 points once against the Ravens and lost both of those games.
The NFL draft is such a special time for fans, the organization, and of course the players who have worked their entire lives for this weekend. And earlier this week, I caught up with ESPN analyst Booger McFarland to talk about his draft process versus now and who the Ravens could be eyeing with that 27th overall pick.
If recruiting is the lifeblood of college football, then the draft is the lifeblood of the NFL, because it's the talent acquisition phase, right? So how do you change your team? Either through free agency or the draft.
Now that you're on the other side of it and you're covering the game that you grew up playing and that you love, and you're able to kind of maybe mentor some of these younger guys that are coming through the ranks, how much have you seen just the whole draft process kind of change from when you were getting drafted in '99?
Number one, it's covered year round. Number two, guys are preparing for the draft year round. You had kids opting out of seasons a couple of years ago. And even now, man, like there's so many draft pundits and so many people who are experts in mock drafts and all these different things. The draft has kind of become an entity of its own from the standpoint of it's not just the draft, it's the combine, it's the offseason. So the draft takes on really from the time the Super Bowl ends it's like a 3 or 4 month deal.
Where do you sit on the overall scope of this draft?
I think this is a draft where if you have picks in the top 4 rounds, you're going to be able to get quality football players that can come in and be starters on your team for a long time. And they may develop in the Hall of Fame and all-pro players. You don't know. But I think at the floor, I think at the floor of a lot of these players in this draft is going to be solid NFL starter that's going to play 7 to 10 years.
Where do you feel like the Ravens should go, and what should they look to do in this draft?
If there's a safety that can kind of play center field, Malachi Starks come to mind. Every time I've seen a lot of mock drafts where Malachi is kind of there. You often hear play like a Raven. And what does that mean? It just means the mentality, how we play football, how we show up to work. Malachi Starks is that guy. I don't worry about the tested numbers. I don't worry about what he ran in the 40. I've seen some of the plays that he made. He comes from a football program in Georgia where I know football is important down in Georgia.
Offensively, do you feel like they need to bolster up anything on that side of the ball?
Like, you can always talk about the offensive line and maybe adding another receiver, depending on what's going to happen with Mark Andrews. I saw they were non-committal with him. We'll see. Could Mason Taylor be a possibility there? I doubt it, because you got Likely. Likely's got to take the next step forward, depending on whether or not you bring Andrews back. Do you need another wideout? Do you need a bigger wideout? You got Zay, Bateman. I think they could be okay there. Defensively, though, I think, because here's what happens when you pay the quarterback as much as you're paying him. He's got to make sure the other guys rise up. Now you got to go help this defense out, man, to make sure you can stop somebody.
Making our way through the AFC North, our final stop finds us in Pittsburgh, where the Steelers and Ravens battled 3 times a season ago. The Ravens went 2-1 against the Steelers, which included a playoff matchup right here at M&T Bank Stadium. But this offseason for the 10-7 Pittsburgh Steelers has been a bit odd, to say the least. They lost both of their quarterbacks. Russell Wilson went to the Giants, and Justin Fields went to the Jets. So, will the Steelers go QB? ESPN's Brooke Pryor takes us to the Steel City.
I cannot remember covering a Steelers team at this point in the offseason that there is still so much uncertainty. We were talking earlier today, and some of the other Steelers reporters, about how, if we're grading, what grade would we give the Steelers on their offseason? And at this point, I give it an incomplete, because we don't know who the starting quarterback's going to be. I can't remember a draft in recent memory where so much has been up in the air, especially because they did make some pretty substantial un-Steelers-like moves in doing things like trading for DK Metcalf. They let Najee Harris, their first-round running back from a couple years ago, walk after they elect to not sign him to a 5th-year option a year ago. This is a team that's in, I think, a really interesting point offensively. They seem like they know the identity that they want in trading for DK Metcalf. Still at this point, having George Pickens on the roster, they go and get Kenneth Gainwell. Seems like, okay, they can draft a running back. This is a really deep running back class. But the backdrop of it all is, who's the starting quarterback going to be?
You were to say Shedeur Sanders to the Steelers at pick, 21, a few weeks ago, a month ago, I think people would have looked around and said, okay, you're crazy. What do you know that we don't know, right? And then all of a sudden, more information comes out, and it seems that he's falling. But what's the likelihood of Shedeur falling to 21, in your opinion?
I give it a 50-50 shot at this point. It really feels like if he gets past the Saints at 9, the Steelers are the most realistic landing spot for him. And he checks a lot of boxes for the Steelers. Mike Tomlin loves nothing more than a prospect that has NFL bloodlines. He loves brothers. He loves, your uncle played in the NFL, your dad, your cousin, whatever. He very much loves to draft guys that have an NFL pedigree.
Where do you feel like the Steelers can get better? Quarterback aside, where do you feel like they could really, bolster and strengthen their roster?
I think it's all about the defensive tackles and the running backs in this draft class for the Steelers, which is great. I mean, I think that those are 2 of the strongest positions in this draft class. I think it was Jordan Reed, one of our ESPN draft analysts, that said this is a real meat and potatoes draft, that there's not a lot of flash. There's not a lot of, wide receiver depth, quarterback depth even. It's not a lot of even secondary depth. But when you look at the guys that are going to get down and do the nitty gritty stuff, do the dirty work, there are a lot of those guys, which is great for the Steelers because that's who they want to build their organization around.
And when Mike Tomlin spoke to the media earlier this week, he said no matter what Aaron Rodgers decides to do or not to do, it will have no impact on how the Steelers approach this year's draft. We want to thank you so much for joining us and watching our NFL Draft pre-special on WMAR. But coming up next is the moment you all have been waiting for. It is the 2025 NFL Draft. Good night, everybody.